That's my cue. Okay. Okay, good morning, folks. I'm Barry Klein. You're at the weekly meeting of the Houston Property Rights Association. And if you can all give me your attention, we are now live. This is the Today in Houston show on the Houston Media Source, which is a local cable station. It's being live, it's going over live, plus it's being live streamed, and it'll be recorded and available several times in the coming week on Houston Media Source. So I'm pleased to have you all here today. We're going to have, I think, a very fascinating presentation on transportation, and particularly private sector transportation, which is normally ignored by the media, but has lately been a source of great interest because of the changes in technology. It's allowing major improvements in the taxi industry, which have been unavailable to the public until the arrival of the internet. But before we go into that, I'd like to talk to you about some of the handouts that I've put out before you, so if you'll give me a moment. First of all, I'd like to talk to you a bit about what's been happening in Richmond, Texas. As many of you know, I have been going to Richmond for the last 3 months doing block walking in that city of 12,000 people. This is about a 70-mile round trip. Working with some local activists in Fort Bend and some in the city of Richmond itself, with the goal of getting enough signatures to put a charter amendment on the ballot that would require an election on zoning. That city has decided it's going to bring in zoning. The ordinance is currently being written by their consultant. It'll be ready in March. And it is my view and the view of the people who signed the petition, over 500 people, that when it's finished, it should be on the ballot. Now, when we turned in the signatures on Wednesday at noon, we had over 500. We did pre-validate over 300. We only needed 251. So, assuming no unexpected, untoward developments, we should be validated soon to be on the ballot. Now, the question is, how quickly will it be validated? It can be done quickly. You can get a disc from the county elections office and quickly go through it in maybe half a day. But if you're not eager to see that appear on the November ballot, you may decide you need more time. So we'll see how that works out. We did generate some media interest. I do expect to see 2 news stories. One might have been in the paper yesterday, and the Chronicle, I guess the Fort Bend section, will probably have a story on that too. That may help put a focus or put a spotlight on City Hall and lead to a decision to quickly validate and put that on the ballot. If it does not appear on the November ballot, there is a line in the proposed charter amendment that says any existing zoning ordinance is hereby repealed. So if it is adopted without being voted on by the City Commission in March of next year, then it would be subject to being overturned by the charter amendment, which in theory would be on the May 2015 ballot. If we're successful in what we would see prefer happen, it would be voted on, well, actually the charter would be amended either in November or May, and in either case, in either scenario, the ordinance itself would end up probably on the ballot in November of 2015. So this could be a game changer in Central Fort Bend politics. Now, among the items before you is one that's headlined, Zoning Reform Eludes the Experts. And this refers to the fact that since the very first years of zoning, when New York City adopted a comprehensive zoning code in 1916, there has been controversy and discontent. And over the years, there have been several attempts to find new ways to zone that gets around the problems of the old ways. And so at this point in Chicago 11 years ago, many of the national experts got together to try and find a pathway to a real reform with zoning. And I think when you read this article, you discover that they did not succeed. They still have major disagreements with each other on what will fix the problems of zoning. And the article also covers 12 different categories of problems that come up with zoning, such as social control, economic segregation, codes too complex to be understood, districts which are actually unmatched to neighborhoods, sprawl, flawed assumptions, monoculture of uses, and excessive paving. So all these kinds of unexpected consequences of zoning that are generally not part of the popular discussion, but they could well be in the next few months in Richmond. Another item before you is an article about what's going on in Los Angeles. Cities find it so difficult to live with zoning that they patch it, rewrite it, reinterpret key words, ignore their own master plan, and they get by for years and years and years. But it gets to a point where there's just too many headaches involved, and the city leadership says, much as we hate to do it, we're going to have to admit we can't live with what we have. We're going to have to rewrite it. So they announce it as an update, and then they bring in consultants to take them through a multi-year process to rewrite their code. And of course, when this happens, all those who think they're okay with the current code will fight to keep what they've got, and those who are unhappy with the current code will fight for the changes that will serve them and their perceived needs. Well, this was a very revealing article from Los Angeles, which I've titled Zoning by Exception. And what it points out there that over 60% of Los Angeles is now covered by special districts written and tailored to the advocates for some kind of change that they want in the law so they can move forward with their projects. So it tells us a lot about how things go badly in a city which may not be very different from Houston. And on the backside, you'll see a couple of telling quotes. Here's one man who knows the system well. He says, there are legal backdoors for creating customized zones. Because they are backdoors, they are only accessible to insiders. And another quote, zoning only works to favor who has the power, and that might be just whomever is participating. So the ordinary citizen who's not in the development business really has no choice in the matter except to hire a professional who may have the connections and the knowledge needed to do a work around the current code. Hold on. If you turn to the next handout, this is actually a multi-page handout, and this is the press release we had on Wednesday at noon in front of City Hall in Richmond. I'm working with a local activist named Tress Davis, who is a teacher, and he's very much on board with this. He has run for the city commission. And what we point out here is that what they're really trying to do in Richmond is create a Sugarland West. There is, in my opinion, looking at the literature, an envy of Sugarland, and they want to make Richmond, which is very much of a blue-collar city, into a white-collar city like Sugarland, which would be very, very harmful to a majority of the people who live in Sugarland, benefiting some, They're the ones who are pushing this for one reason or another, but they see a benefit to them. But the ordinary citizen will be harmed, and hopefully we'll get a chance to bring all this out in the next week, the next months, before we have the election, hopefully in November.
How will the ordinary citizen be harmed?
Well, because if they have property they want to develop or redevelop, it becomes very difficult to go through the system. You have to hire an expert who knows the rules and knows how you might find an exception that will allow your project to go forward. Aside from that, the ordinary consumer, which we are, of course, all wear that hat, the costs for the consumer in goods and services go up as it becomes more and more difficult to get a permit to open a business that would challenge an established business. So you get a less rivalrous economic environment where the established interest, the incumbent businesses are protected from competition. And all this requires more tax dollars because you have to create an office that's going to administer the code. Another factor is economic zoning, and where they use the code to exclude the low-income neighborhoods or minimize them or eliminate them from the city. So this is called exclusionary zoning, and in its most egregious form is actually called expulsionary zoning, designed to expel the low-income people from the neighborhoods or from the city itself. Steve?
The quick answer to your question is bribes are expensive.
Another factor is that oftentimes bribery takes place. And of course, most bribery is illegal. It's done on the surface of the table. It goes to a politician's campaign account. It's not labeled as a bribe, of course, but that's effectively what happens.
Bribes are illegal.
Pardon me?
Bribes are illegal.
Only some are. There are plenty of legal bribes. They're called campaign contributions. Now, at the press conference, I also had one of our signs from 1993. We had the same message at the time. There should be no zoning without a referendum first. And I will say that in my block walking, I did pass out lots and lots of flyers to people who showed an interest. In fact, everybody got a flyer from me who signed. And some got the flyer who didn't sign, but were willing to read something. And I get the impression now, after 3 months of doing that, and I think probably I may have gotten 60% of the signatures that we gathered. I think now there's an undercurrent of discontent in Richmond as word is getting out that there's a downside to zoning that they never imagined. And so I'm getting more and more hopeful that we're going to see pressure on the City Hall to quickly validate that petition and put the charter amendment on the November ballot. Lewis?
No zoning with regard to corporate blue-collar workers, because the complaint here in Houston now that people are being forced out of their homes by the government.
That's an ongoing phenomenon. I mean, I'm being forced out of my home. I'm a renter. I live in the near north side. It's now a hot neighborhood. My landlord has sold. I have to leave my residence of many years in 2 months. And that's an ongoing market phenomenon. When the government can sometimes be a part of that kind of thing, and that's what occurs in zone cities where they make it very difficult to they make it impossible to get a permit to build lower cost housing. They can insist that it be of a higher standard on a bigger lot. All these are the factors that can actually make it too costly to build new housing. And of course, most poor people don't live in new housing. They live in hand-me-down housing, in second-hand housing. My residence is over 100 years old. I'm living in a second-hand house. That sort of thing becomes less and less likely if you make it more difficult to build new housing.
Would that be more difficult with zoning for you to be forced out?
It's more likely that you can be forced out if they make it difficult to build replacement housing, build new housing, make it more difficult to maintain what you got at an affordable rate. Let's take a look at what happened here in Houston, the 4th Ward. 10 or 15 years ago, that was mostly low-income housing. The city got aggressive with its housing code, made it too expensive for the landlords to maintain their properties and be willing to accept the minimal rent they're getting from their tenants that paid for the taxes. they eventually were forced to sell to people willing to do land assembly. So now you've seen changes take place because the government got aggressive with its rules. If you give them another tool of mandatory regulation, you'll see more of that kind of thing happening. Garth? Quick announcements.
Some of y'all have not been here before. If you don't have the Mackinac Institute's 7 public policy guidelines, I'll give you one now. There's some great essays on these 7 principles. So if you want just pass these around. The other announcement is y'all have heard this saga I've had for the last 2 years trying to rebuild a garage apartment in the Montrose area. Scheduled finally to pour a foundation next Wednesday, and anybody that's here is invited. If you've never seen a foundation poured, we have a great venue looking down on it. You'll never have the best view of looking at a foundation being poured. And I'm going to serve coffee, pastries. It'll be a morning affair. If you want to come, either take one of my cards or email me and send me your email and a textable phone number in case weather causes changes.
What day of the week?
Wednesday, next Wednesday. Okay.
Okay, well, and as I recall, Garth, you had to hire one of our local experts to work through the system, right?
Yes, I filed for my building permit in May of 2013, rejected. The two main objections were from city planning involving Chapter 42 and the special area minimum lot size. I ended up I wish I'd had her before, hiring Marianne Young, Marianne Henry, rather. Vernon Henry, you all remember the engineering firm, Vernon Henry's wife.
Well, yes, even in Houston, we have lots and lots of regulation. They're already so complex and numerous that you have to hire an expert who knows the system to help you get through it. Another question.
In Richmond, is this because you have all the very large, fancy subdivisions trying to come in and they try to take more land? But it's not because of that?
No, it's simply the local business leadership in the Richmond-Rosenberg area who are entranced by the idea of turning their area into a Sugar Land West. That's a lot of it. Another factor is that they regret that time of a generation or two ago when Rosenberg and Richmond were the center of the political activity in that county. And now that's shifted east to Missouri City and Sugar Land. And so they would like to recapture some of that prominence within the county.
But the people there they're working class people.
Right.
And that's the majority of them.
That's correct.
For
right.
these planned communities that are coming in.
Well, they're not coming into the city. They're outside the city. Some are being annexed, sometimes in a limited fashion. But they're not driving the process. It's other people who are some business people who have a vision for their combined community of Richmond, Rosenberg, and they're going to do this one way or another. And zoning would be very much a part of their plan. Do you have a comment over here? Oh, okay. So that's my view of what I read on the websites of the respective organizations. One is very prominent in this activity is the West Fort Bend Management District, which is an appointed board of 5 people, but they have connections to the City Hall of both Richmond and Rosenberg, and that's where you find, I think, the nexus of power and decision-making taking place. Okay, so let's move on. Now, as I mentioned, cities have to go through revisions to their zoning code frequently so they can live with it. Otherwise, they probably would drop zoning if they're actually forced to live with their own rules and regulations. So let's look at the story of Miami, which recently went through a massive overhaul, took many years, of its zoning code. And on their website, I found this article about the history of zoning in Miami. And there were a couple of very telling comments. At one point, they amended their ordinance in 1934, and the historian says the amendments created a hodgepodge, meaningless ordinance similar to what Miami is experiencing today. So I thought that was quite revealing. And then another point in 1982, let's see here. Despite all the acclaim and high regard by fellow planning professionals, the new code was widely regarded by residents and developers as incomprehensible when it was first introduced. At the very beginning point, they found it to be incomprehensible. So why don't these cities simply drop zoning? Well, they can't, because it'd be admitting failure with the whole idea for all those years beforehand. And of course, it means giving up power. That's how politicians get people willing to work with them, give them donations to their campaigns, is by having that power. And of course, there's a very established industry helping cities write and rewrite their zoning codes and implement them, and they too would fight against any attempt to drop a zoning code. Turning to the next page, a story from Buffalo. Buffalo is also going through an overhaul of its zoning code. Now there's actually several kinds of zoning at this point, and they're going to adopt something called form-based zoning. They're in the process of it's a 5-year process. Their current code is 1,800 pages long, and they're trying to trim it down to 300 pages to make it accessible to the ordinary citizen. Now, the next 2 pages deal again with Los Angeles. Now, this is off the Los Angeles City website, and they point out there's actually 5 different categories of zoning. Jimmy, you asked this question last time we talked about this. You have Euclidean zoning, which is a standard zoning that New York City created in 1916. You have performance zoning, incentive zoning, form-based zoning, and then you have a mixture called hybrid zoning. And I've actually read about another kind of zoning just last night called conditional zoning. Conditional zoning appears to be acknowledged there's no sense to whatever they come up with, so you have to simply apply for something that they would let you do, and then you negotiate with City Hall and see if they'll give it to you. So it's all conditional on how that would work out. Okay, then moving on to the last 2 pages. One is the cover letter to the city secretary when the signatures were turned in. The way this is done in Texas is that it's 5% of the registered voters as of the date of the oldest signature in your petition. So they had 5,016 voters when we started on May 10th. And so 5% is 251. As I say, we turned in, I'm confident, over 300 valid signatures. And the last page in the handout is a copy of the charter amendment itself. I might as well read it to you. The city of Richmond shall have the power to adopt a zoning ordinance only by A, allowing a 6-month waiting period after publication of any proposed ordinance and zoning map for public hearings and debate, and B, holding a binding election at a uniform election date. Any existing zoning ordinance is hereby repealed. So this charter amendment is in the Houston Charter. It's also in the Alvin Charter. It's in the Rosenberg Charter. And Rosenberg made the change in the late 90s. And then finally in 2008, they did put a charter amendment, a zoning ordinance on the ballot, and it was rejected by the voters. Okay. Now the last item before you, and let me take another sip of water. The last item before you deals with the topic of hand, which is the changes taking place in Houston and elsewhere in Texas regarding private transit, for-hire transit, and the changes brought about by new app-based technology that allows a potential customer to hail a cab using their cell phone, and a private sector provider will show up. Now, this is from an article from June. It does give you a kind of the big picture at the time. But we do have a couple of people here I would like to introduce before we bring up our main speaker. And one of them is Alfredo Santos. Alfredo, can you come up here for just a minute? Santos, as he's usually known, was actually an instrumental figure in Houston because in 1989 he sued the city to re-legalize jitneys, which have been illegal since 1924, when the citizens of Houston bought the argument that if they outlawed jitneys, that the streetcar company would buy some new streetcar and also some buses. and the public accepted that deal, and so jitneys were formally outlawed at that point. Now, buses proved to be so successful that within 2 years, the transit company was already discontinuing its rail lines, and in 1936 decided to get rid of all the rest, and so in 1940 it became an all-bus system. But jitneys would have been a very viable and successful choice had they been allowed to continue. Santos filed that lawsuit in '89. It took the federal judge 5 years to finally rule, but in 1994, at that point, jitneys became legal again in Houston. Unfortunately, City Hall adopted some very tough regulations, and nothing really happened until Lauran Barrash got into the game, and we'll hear about that in a minute. But Santos, can you come up here and tell us a bit about that lawsuit and what you're doing currently?
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Alfredo Santos, and I came to Houston in 1979, a young man, a thin man, more hair on my head man. I'm now 28 years from being 100. So I'm not a young man anymore. But while I was here, I taught school the first year, and then I heard some interesting stories about the taxi cab business. So I got my taxi cab license, went to taxi school for 3 days, like everybody had to back then, and became a Houston taxi cab driver for Yellow Cab in 1980. And back then in the early 80s, Houston was Jump City. There was, how many people were here in Houston in the 80s? A lot of people? Okay. There was a lot of business for taxis back then. You could make $400 a day, easy, driving a taxi cab in Houston. Back then, the bus system was broke. There was they said 1,000 people a day coming to Houston. I believe that because I used to see the church buses coming in from Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. The buses were bringing parishioners in because the economy was so bad back up north, and they lived wherever they could, and they called taxis, and it was Jump City. In fact, it was so bad in Houston in terms of enough services and enough apartments and enough of anything that people would come to conventions and have to stay in Galveston and other places. There weren't enough hotel rooms. There weren't even enough prostitutes in Houston. For the big conventions, they had to fly them in from Las Vegas, you know, and then they would hire us, and we'd make a lot of money that week. Because again, rides, you got to get from point A to point B to say hello to John. Anyway, but nothing is forever, and in the middle 80s, the economy started to collapse, and that includes the taxi business. The business got slow. I took a little vacation to Mexico, and I discovered something called peceros, from the word peso, and what these were Volkswagen vans that would run up and down the street and carry people. They charged more than the taxi, more than the bus, but less than a taxi, and it would get you from point A to point B. I thought it was a great idea, and so when I came back, I started doing this with a leased yellow cab on the East End, and I used a system that people were already familiar with in Mexico, where you stick your hand out the window and say, "I got room for 2, I got room for 3," and people would flag you down, and you'd go for. I didn't ride 5 miles for $1 back then. Anyway, I did not know what the word jitney meant. 2 bits is slang for a quarter. Jitney was slang for a nickel back in 1914. And I got in trouble for doing this, for using my cab as a jitney here in Houston, and I was informed by the cab inspector that I was violating the 1924 anti-jitney law. And so he was threatening to give me tickets and get me fired and all that, which they eventually did. But I found that you could make a lot of money running a jitney in Houston. And anyway, Barry, I ran into Barry at a political party, and we became friends, and he helped me think about this idea. And he wrote a letter eventually that got published in the Wall Street Journal, someplace like that, and a lawyer read it. A lawyer who wasn't chicken, because we have a lot of lawyers in Houston who are chicken. A lot of my friends are chicken lawyers, anyway. Yeah. Anyway, and so Clint Bolick from the Institute for Justice flew to Houston. Barry and I picked him up at the airport. We went and had lunch, and his organization agreed to represent us in court. And so we sued the city, and as Barry said, it took 5 years for a courageous judge to finally read the lawsuit and make a ruling, because they passed the lawsuit around several times. Everyone was afraid of getting involved, of touching this issue. And finally, John something, what's his name? Forgot. Anyway, he ruled, and he ruled that the 1924 anti-jitney law was unconstitutional, violated several provisions of Sherman Antitrust Act, 14th Amendment, all kinds of stuff like that. So after 70 years, we got a ruling, and this law became unconstitutional. And it's interesting that, I stand here before you, and the year is 2014. And this jitney thing was something that started in 1914. So we're talking about 100 years. And so the debate that's going on today about Uber and Lyft and other kinds of ground transportation is in many ways an old issue. It's 100 years old. We've had this kind of discussion before about what's fair, what's a level playing field, blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. So I'm standing before you right now sharing a few thoughts about jitneys and ground transportation. 100 years from now, someone's going to be standing here talking about ground transportation and the technology that is involved then, and we'll be eating Chinese food again. Quick questions? Any questions? No? All right. I should tell you that I'm in the newspaper publishing business, and we have several papers throughout the state of Texas. But last month, on July 12th, I became a Lyft driver in Austin. And so, why lie? I like running around. I like talking to people, and I'm doing it again at the age of 62. And is it legal? Is it illegal? I don't know. Catch me if you can. Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Blair B. was walked in. I have to point out Blair and I made several trips down to Richmond getting signatures on the weekend. And it also gives me a chance to acknowledge Dale Gribble. Dale also helped out with petitioning. The effort in Richmond was a mixture of Republicans and Libertarians and Democrats working together to bring about this change. And I see this as a template for what can occur across the country. We have 5,400 home rule cities with charters in this country. 47 states allow something like we're doing here in Texas. And so after we finish getting this on the ballot and it's validated, then there has to be a campaign of voter education. And I'm already talking to Tress Davis, the local spokesman for the effort, to set up some workshops so we can start to educate some of the social and political and religious leaders in that city about the downside of zoning and get them ready to approve that charter amendment in November. Okay, let's see here. Okay, one more thing to bring up is that reading a local paper in Richmond, I discovered that the ETJ is very important to the people who are running the small towns of Texas. The ETJ is the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And that's an area much larger than the city itself, around the city, that the Texas law gives them control over many land use issues beyond the borders of a city. And Houston has this power 5 miles beyond this border. Smaller cities have a smaller reach, maybe 1 or 2 miles. But when you take all those small cities together, combining their ETJs, a large part of rural Texas is controlled by the city halls of these small cities with their extraterritorial jurisdiction powers. And so I decided we need to do some research on this, look into the history of it. I'm sure it's a flawed history that deals with assuming the powers of government planners to plan for the future. That's why city halls need to have power over land beyond the borders of a city. All that, of course, we know is easily challenged by the history of planning failures. So I see that as an issue that Houston Proprety Rights Association may decide to take up in the near future. Hold a second. Okay, now let's bring up the main event, Lauran Barrash. Lauran and I think, met on the phone. How long ago did you set up Washington Wave?
It will be 5 years.
5 years ago. There was a news story about what she was doing. Lauran will tell you the story, I'm sure, about why she decided she needed to have a jitney operation, the trouble she took to get that first jitney on the streets, and then some of the changes that have taken place in the law since then. And she also has objections. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Josh, come on up here. You're going to tell us what happened at City Hall regarding the recent changes to the transportation code.
Yeah, my name is Joshua Bullard. I was a cab driver for 10 years. What City Council did specifically is they issued a limitless cap with Uber and Lyft and the transportation companies. So the ride-sharing companies will have no limit on how many cars they can have in service. So they could essentially have 20, 30, 50,000 cars in service. The idea is that those will be people that have a main revenue source and then they work part-time to do a few trips throughout the week. It's predicted that will have a severe impact on the old school medallion-based cab company, Yellow Cab. And the reason why that is because basically you've gone from a closed market to an open market, and it took a $1 billion company in order to accomplish this. There were always small outfits, over the years that were never successful in doing this. The other change that City Council made is it also included in the ordinance that the cab companies or the medallion holders now will also be able to infuse a level of surge pricing along with Uber and Lyft. So now what you will begin to see is when you contact a Yellow Cab company through their Helicab app, you may end up getting a surge price along with Uber and Lyft. It probably would be in line. For example, it may cost you $12 to go somewhere with Yellow Cab or Uber or Lyft, but it may cost you $40 to get back home. And I think that specific introduction to the market is what people will have to adapt to. And I think that's the price you pay when you introduce the free market, is that you introduce a fluctuating price scale. So that's going to be interesting to see. I actually had some people in my cab at the Summerfest, and Uber was asking for $67 to go from downtown to Kirby and 59. I think the taxi price was about $12. So with the City Council now making that a level playing field, don't know where they'll go with that, but I can assure you that if you go to any function, whether it be a concert or you go to Reliance Stadium, the surge pricing will take effect as you want to leave that venue, because everyone is requesting a cab. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I actually have one more person I want to bring up. Gregory Harrison is with an organization called Empower Texans, which you probably have heard about. The man who runs that was recently dealt a blow by a state agency when it declared, well, they're going to fine him. Is that what's going to happen? Why don't you come up here and tell us about the group and what's happening to Michael?
All right.
Gregory Harrison.
Hello, my name's Gregory. This is my first time coming to this group. I work for Empower Texans, which is we're an Austin-based group, a taxpayer watchdog. We do is we exist to promote the ideals of fiscal stewardship and basic governmental responsibility, which seem to be increasingly rare nowadays at all levels of government. And so we do that by keeping an eye on elected officials and then letting their constituents know what they're doing. Basically just talking about them. And is that has got us into trouble with the Texas Ethics Commission, who has tried to label my boss, our president, Michael Quinn Sullivan, as a lobbyist for talking about what elected officials are doing and then telling them that they would be considered by publishing a scorecard and then letting them know, hey, this bill that's coming up, this is how we're going to rank it. And that's all we do. And that to them classifies us as a lobbyist, which fortunately they tried to pass a bill, Senate Bill 346, not that long ago, that fortunately Governor Perry vetoed, that citing that it would have had a chilling effect on First Amendment rights in the state. And essentially what the precedent that would have set is if you talk to your elected officials, you are a lobbyist. It creates barriers for First Amendment rights to try and petition your government, which is something that as liberty-minded people we should all be holding very sacred. And so we are in that fight right now with the Texas Ethics Commission. They just slapped him with a $10,000 fine, which we are appealing, and we're going to fight it all the way. And so, that's what Barry wanted me to talk a little bit about. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy. Yes, sir.
I ran into that similar problem, and the person that was giving me grief about it was Alan Blakemore. Isn't Alan Blakemore a big supporter of your boss?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, Alan Blakemore is a local political consultant. This organization has donors. I don't think Blakemore is donating to the organization.
I just walked back in from the bathroom. I apologize. Do you work for Michael Quinn Sullivan?
Yes.
And you don't know who Alan Blakemore is?
No, he's a local guy.
Yeah. All right.
But Mr. Blakemore is not known as a donor to nonprofits.
If he doesn't know, he doesn't know.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll be back for a full presentation at a later time.
Sure.
Okay, now we're going to get on to Lauran. As I say, Lauran is a pioneer in the re-legalized jitney business 5 years ago. Changes have taken place during her time, and now just recently, big change at City Hall. We've already had Josh talk to us about what he thinks is going to be happening in the very near future. Now we're going to have Lauran tell us her more comprehensive view. So I'll give you Lauran Barrash.
Okay. So just in case I have questions, I brought. So Barry had asked me to also give you all my bio because I have been a little bit busy at City Hall for, 7 months-ish. So I was born and raised in Houston, and I have a master's in social work, which is not a good combo with an MBA, because bleeding heart and capitalism are not a good combo. I have learned to find out that very quickly. And I was in healthcare for a long time, and ironically had a couple mojitos at Benji's on Washington Avenue and thought that there should be a shuttle because I was too drunk to drive home. And I did not anticipate 5 years later that I would have a fleet of 7 jitneys, or even know what the word jitney meant. So my brilliant idea was really just a drunken need. And I will not call myself the pioneer. I think the pioneer is sitting here in this room because I definitely wouldn't have been here without him. And when I first started, I, again, had this drunken great idea, and I was getting my MBA at Rice at the time, and told some of my other drunken friends that are now entrepreneurs as well, there should be a shuttle, and they said, I'm tired of your good ideas and your big mouth. Do something about it or somebody else will. And Rice really trains you to be quite competitive, especially against yourself, and I said, game on. And thought at the time it would be kind of a side gig. I'd hire some young guys to drive the bus, and I would keep my very, very nice Fortune 50 national director position. And very quickly, when I started doing the research, realized, I actually might be onto something. The first article that I found was, of course, about the pioneer over there. However, I called the city when I started looking like, okay, there must be something I have to do before I could just go buy something and drive around, right? And I called the city and I said, I'd like to file a suburban permit, because that's what I had read looked like what I wanted to do. And they said, no, that's not what you want. You want a jitney permit. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. But no, I'm reading it here. I want a suburban permit. So after much debate, it looked like I needed to get a jitney permit. And the ordinance had not been touched since the Pioneer and fellow stakeholders wrote it, so it was quite old at the time, but I didn't know any better. And my parents now question me, like, when did you start following the rules? Because you were not a good kid. But I didn't know that it was optional, so I followed the rules. And because the way it was written, it couldn't be more than 5 years, et cetera. I had to put a jitney light on the roof, which I have to import from Canada because nobody makes them where they're screw-in anymore. They're all magnetic, and a bus is not all made of steel. It's fiberglass, so nothing will magnetize to it. And the way that it was written, I had to have markings on the vehicle that no one in their right mind would lease a vehicle to me. So I had to purchase them. And because it had to be 5 years or under, these kinds of vehicles, nobody sells them at that age because they're babies at 5 years. So the only vehicles that I could find were, the first one was here at Texas Bus Sales, and it's very funny to go in there now because when I walked in, I was like, okay, so I want my seats to be like this, and I want a mirror here, and they're like, Princess, this is not a Camry. Do you want that bus? Because it's what's made now. Otherwise, we can get you one manufactured for $90,000, and it'll be 90 days. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll take that one. And now I meet them at BusCon, which is the big bus conference in Chicago, and they're like, you have come a long way from your knowledge. So I purchased that one, and I realized, again, very quickly, the one bus wasn't going to cut it. We had a lot of national publicity when we first started, and I bought the second one before the end of 2009. And at that point, I was like, okay, clearly this nice cushy job that I have isn't going to work with this now very full-time, because it's a very political industry, and people ask me, if you knew now what you knew then. I can tell you without question, had I known what I was getting into, I would not have gotten into it. And now I say that, but of course I knew I was going skydiving when I got on that airplane, and I still did it. So maybe I would have still done it because I like competition. But I think I came at it at a very naive, and I'm still naive, approach. And I didn't know better but to talk to all stakeholders before I did anything. So I met with Metro, and I called them and I said, I'd like to purchase your trolleys, because I don't know if you all remember the trolleys that they would run. They said, we sold them all. Great. They'd been sitting doing nothing for years, and they sold all 39 of them to different cities. And I said, and by the way, this is what my idea is. And at first it was just Washington Avenue, and then my next plan was to add Midtown. And they said, this is the first time ever that we will say we're not interested in doing that business. Go for it. We're 100% dedicated to light rail. Okay. So I cleared that, and then I spoke to the taxi owners, taxi drivers, limo association, and there's 2 of them. I spoke to parking management, public works, city council members, the mayor's office. There's, as I know that all of you know, there's a lot of hands involved in any decision at the city. And my theory after going through all of that was the right hand didn't even know it was attached to the same body as the left hand. Not that they didn't know what each other were doing, but they weren't even in the same realm of the room. So my ordinance, and after 10 months of being in business, I met with all stakeholders again and rewrote a bit of the ordinance to make it, a little more up to date for what was the need at the time. And when I first applied in 2009, I followed the application, and it sent me to a building that had been torn down. And I thought, okay, this is a joke, I'm being punked. Where is everybody? And I have the printed application in front of me, and so I'm driving around. No. Then I went to get my fingerprints, and I walk in, and it said it was open 24/7, and I was working a lot, so it was 11:30 at night, and I'm sort of dressed like this, and at the time I was younger and much thinner as well. So I guess jitney business makes you older and gain weight. That's the moral of this story. And I walked in, and it's at Reasoner, which I had never been to because I have not, in fact, ever been arrested or bailed anybody out or anything like that. So I walk in, I'm like, I need to get my fingerprints. They're like, ma'am, this is the head of narcotics division of HPD. We haven't done that in 10 years. And I was like, okay, well. And they're like, we'll just escort you back to your car because it's late at night and I'm now at the jail, dressed like this on a Saturday night. So I leave and I call the office on Monday. I'm like, So they won't do my fingerprints at HPD. Where am I supposed to go? They're like, oh yeah, hold on, and it took weeks for me to work through this, and I then helped them and rewrote their physical application that was totally outdated. And in the ordinance today, it says that we're not to have designated stops. And the city put in 38 jitney stops. They asked me where I wanted them, and I told them, and we drove around, and they put the signs up. So clearly the right hand and the left hand don't really communicate. I think a lot of what has happened is, I think maybe I'm take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm very naive after what has happened this week. I'm still as naive, I think, that I was 5 years ago. But I think they trust that I'm going to do what's right because I haven't broken any laws, but I've learned that maybe that's what I should do because apparently you make way more money breaking the laws than following them. So I think they just trust, and I always ask all these questions like, can I do this? Can I do this? They're like, stop. If it's not in there, don't ask. Because if you ask, then we have to find out the answer, and you might not like it. I was like, okay. I mean, this is not, first of all, this is not my character to like follow the rules in my personal world as a child growing up, but I just didn't know what else to do. So I stopped asking questions, but again, they trust. We've never, knock on everything, because now they're probably gonna ticket me today, but we've never had a ticket. My drivers, as much of a nightmare as it is, have to go get fingerprinting, drug screen, physical, municipal court clearance, character reference. And oftentimes they'll lose things at the city and they have to do it again at their own expense. And these are people that I'm trying to employ that are there to make more money or have been out of work, and I'm trying to help provide jobs, and I'm constantly looking for drivers, but they can't even technically work for me until they spend $189 out of pocket. I feel like I'm operating one of those triangle pyramid knife sale things, like, come and work for me, spend $200. I mean, it's kind of a hard sale, right, when I'm trying to hire people. But my drivers, fortunately, I have an amazing team. They're lawyers, they're teachers, they do it because it's fun. A lot of them started with me at the beginning because they lived in the Washington corridor and they saw that there was a serious need and they wanted to help. So it's been a very interesting 5 years. The last 7 months has been even more interesting. And as much as my life and my pocketbook would have been much appreciated if I didn't have to have 24/7 commercial insurance or licensed permitted drivers or physically own my vehicles, I might actually get a paycheck again. That would be nice. Because I would be in the same place and bankrupt if I wasn't single with no debt when I started this. The single part is still part of the equation. The no debt is not. But I truly believe in what I'm doing. I know what our riders were doing before they were riding. So that's the social work piece that I've really got to get rid of. Like, my professors yell at me all the time from Rice, like, I appreciate that you want to do what's right, but that's not going to work if you have any desire to ever make money in this society. So I do believe in what we're doing. I do. And I went to City Hall, and I was not fighting Uber and Lyft. I was the first one at the beginning of all this, because I'd like to remind you all, when I go to the stakeholders meetings, I was the first new entrant into competition transportation in years, since you were there. Nobody else has come into the market. And so I didn't feel like they were anti-competitive because I'm here, right? They could have easily kept me out. But I was the first one. So in this room, right, is all, no offense to anyone, but relatively everyone in the room is middle-aged white men that own these companies, and me, who's significantly younger, who's social media, which I also was not into until I started this business and learned I had to. I didn't know what tweeting was. I thought it was a bird. And so I've had to do a lot of education, but I came to them before the Uber and Lyft even were here, because I started reading articles about things that were happening on the West Coast. And I personally, if Uber Black was here, I'm totally okay with that. As much as the process is a challenge for me, I would have no idea about transportation if I wasn't in it. And I will tell you, being in it, and because I have to oftentimes outsource things and I have to, get other vehicles for different kinds of things and events, I feel strongly that it's still my reputation on the line at the end of the day. I was born and raised here. My parents still live here. I have to face the public. And there are very few people in the industry that I trust enough to manage my customers and my clients and my family. So I now appreciate the little sticker that's in my windows. I work very hard for it, but I also, not that it protects you guys or anybody else in the public from everything that can happen in the world. There's nothing that will protect that. But it gives me a little bit of comfort knowing, okay, I know that somebody knows for a fact that the day the guy that got, or woman that's driving that got a license, they were not a convicted child rapist, right? I know that in order to have that license, somebody ran their fingerprints at least once, right? They only do it every 2 years, so they could have done something in between, but at least somebody's checking that, right? So I see that, and seeing that little thing in the window, and trust me, I have seen things in the window on vehicles that weren't the permitted vehicle, but it gives me a little bit of comfort knowing that my 13-year-old niece has an app and can get in a vehicle. At least I know that there's a company behind that little sticker and there's recourse, okay? So, but in some other markets, New York City, for example, the drivers there from these app companies have 24/7 insurance and permits. So for me to hear the city council who fought for me, cut the ribbon when I went into business, put the feather in their hat that when I was on the front page of the New York Times, like, we got this, company here, 24/7 insurance, yada, yada, that they were voting no on things that I truly, without my company, if my company is gone, and for full, we don't make tons of money because I spend a lot of money on doing what's right, for them to say no to things that I never had a lobbyist or whatever because I thought that those were no-brainers. Like, yes, 24/7 insurance, right? Why would we not want that? Because other markets have it, and I think, why would Houstonians not deserve the same protection? So it was very disheartening for me to hear certain ones of those things. It was also kind of disheartening to hear a multi-billion-dollar company and a multi-million-dollar company say things like, that Houston's anti-competitive, the taxi market, all the monopolies, yada, yada. But what's more anti-competitive than coming into a market that has vehicles for hire and launching illegally, right? So you're not paying taxes. You don't have to pay for permits, insurance, etc. Coming in here, launching a massive marketing and predatory pricing campaign saying free rides, right? How is any business supposed to compete against that when they're not even a business here? And it hurt my business. I don't know about the others, but I'm the one that was going to suffer the fastest and the hardest because they went straight for my customers. When you see their little map, it surrounds my routes. And my riders are the young phone app, whatever. I paid somebody $7,500 to develop an app for me, which I would rather get that on a paycheck, which I don't get. And so we have an app, it's not as robust, whatever, but I knew that I gotta get there, right? But to me, that's anti-competitive. That's saying I want to kill everyone else's business before we're even in business legally. Because that's what their goal was, to steal. And all of the emails, I don't know if any of you get them from them or see it on their ads, whatever. It's, do you hate taxis? We're cheaper than taxis, yada, on and on. I personally feel like that's the anti-competitive side. Here, all of us stakeholders, and I have a very small business, so I don't have a team that can show up for me. I have to do it. And here we're all showing up every week after week after week and doing research to try and write an ordinance where they can come into business, just like I did at the time. And I did speak in front of you all in 2010 when there was an illegal operator. And I said, come on in, we'll write you your own ordinance. And we did. And he never got a single vehicle permitted, and he went out of business. And here we're doing it again, but because they had such dollars, I felt like that to me was very insulting. I'm not being anti-competitive, I just want it to be sustainable and safe for everybody, because I know what the market is like. So I also want to clarify, I think you had said something about rideshare. And that to me is also such a misnomer. Ride sharing is, hey, I work downtown and I live in Kingwood. Do you work downtown and live in Kingwood? then let's share a ride. It's multiple people that originate in a location that are heading the same direction that share a vehicle. And oftentimes they share who drives, they share the expense themselves. Ride sharing is not, hey, I own a car, let me drive around in circles and try and pick people up and make some cash. That's taxi service. So there's a very big difference. Ride sharing, in fact, does take cars off the road, right? If 5 of us live in the same neighborhood and every day we drive from Richmond, Texas to Greenway Plaza and we decide to share a car instead of all 5 of us driving our cars, that is ride sharing, and that takes 4 of those cars off the road. The people that are driving for the organizations, the phone app people, they wouldn't be driving around in circles getting rides at that time if they weren't trying to make money. Their cars would be sitting idle and not increasing emissions, right? I mean, it's not, hey, I'm in Midtown right now, I just went out drinking, who else is going home to my neighborhood? That's not what's happening. So ride sharing is not what these are. And the city of Houston did put in their ordinance some very clear definitions that this is not ride sharing. There are a lot of federal grants for ride sharing programs. There's a big one that's going to launch in the energy corridor, which I think is fantastic. But these are not ride sharing. Truthfully, I think the wave is ride sharing, right? A bunch of people get in a vehicle heading the same direction and we drop them off that were driving before. So the anti-competitive thing, the ride-sharing thing, and also the entrepreneurship thing. So they all march in there, all the Uber and Lyft drivers, with these signs saying that Houston's anti-entrepreneurship, et cetera. And I personally find that totally insulting. I did not plan in my life to be an entrepreneur. I tell everybody that working for the man is totally underrated because the woman does not pay and doesn't give vacations and has to show up even if you're sick or whatever. I don't think they have the first idea about what entrepreneurship is, what starting a business is. Driving around in your car that you own and collecting money is not entrepreneurship. You did not start a business, you work for a very big company that sends you paychecks. Entrepreneurship is something I've never experienced in my life like this. You learn so much so quickly. I am in transportation boot camp every day. My brain, I asked my father, who's a brain surgeon, one time, I was like, is it possible that because I have to remember so much, like right this minute, that my long-term memory doesn't have room? Because I don't remember anything. I'll be at dinner with my girlfriends. They're like, remember when we went on that trip? Was I there? No. I can't remember anything anymore because, I mean, it's a lot. And my professors, how's everything going? What can we help with? I'm like, I want my money back. You guys did not teach me anything. You have to become HR, and you have to be a lobbyist, and you have to be an attorney and an accountant, which I hate accounting, and you have to be a marketing professor. I mean, entrepreneurship is not driving around in your car and somebody sending you a paycheck. That to me is totally insulting. Yes, sir.
Do you pick up all your customers on Washington Avenue?
No.
And how far do you take them?
Okay, so I'll go into that. Also, just by a show of hands, had any of y'all not heard of the wave before today? The wave.
Never heard of it.
Okay, so I'm sorry, let me go back 700 steps. So the wave is what I started. It's a jitney in Houston. Fixed route, fixed rate, circulating shuttle bus, more than 9. I could read the whole 42 pages off the top of my head, but generally that's what we are, okay? So I launched on Washington because, as you know, that was a major problem at the time. And I live in that area, which is why I did it. There were drunks in my yard every night. There was a naked guy passed out in my front yard. No lie, I have the picture one night. I mean, the area got really big, really fast, and the traffic was terrible. I could never get home if I came from I-10 because that TC Jester, I mean, it was terrible. So I knew that that was the fastest location I needed to launch. But because of our ridership, they didn't just want to go up and down Washington. They wanted to go home to Midtown or to the Heights. So we added routes to Midtown and the Heights. And then they wanted to go home to Rice Village. So again, the social work piece, I just wanted everybody to get home safely and whatever. So we have routes now that cover from Sage to BBVA Stadium and from 20th Street to University Boulevard. So we have several routes that are in that area, and my routes are not published because they're so totally complex, because I did it where we get within like 3 blocks of almost everybody in that area. And GIS software is not something that I have time to learn and get a master's in, but I've tried. And so now they're just like Google Maps with red lines on them, and they're very complex. The city did actually post them on their website last week. So that's generally where we service, but we get a ton of calls and a ton of riders that aren't appropriate for us, so we refer them to taxis, or they're a limo service. When we're not running, we post the sites for B-Cycle, Light Rail, and the taxi services so that people kind of know. And so we generally operate Thursdays through Sundays from 6 to 3. So kind of the heavy theater, bar, restaurant, that kind of traffic. When I initially started my research, and I was like, literally every hour I would go to my house, type up what I have found, go back on the street and walk around and talk to people like, where'd you come from? Where's your car, et cetera. And I was like, I hate my customers. They're drunk, they're half naked, and they're from Pearland. And I was like, I can't believe this is who I'm serving. This is going to drive me nuts. They're 12 years old, and they need to pull their skirts down. That's not who rides. That is totally not who rides the bus. I mean, yes, they ride. We do make them pull their skirts down. But the people that ride are the people that have something to lose. 21-year-olds still think they're invincible no matter what you put in front of them. But it's the people that have jobs and families. And my mom and her friends ride to the theater because if they go to dinner and have a drink, they should not be driving. They really shouldn't be driving, period. But at the drink, they absolutely should not be driving. They have a Lexus. You pull up to the hobby center, you get to valet for free. But who cares? Because when you come out, there's 45 minutes to wait for your car to come back. And my mom doesn't want to stand in line for 45 minutes to wait for her car. Or if you park in the garage, it's an hour to get out of the garage because the backup of cars. It's much easier to pick her up at her front door in, the Galleria area and drop her off. And then when the buses come back, she gets on and goes home. So those are the kinds of people that ride. Yes.
But isn't it true, though, that your company is speculated to make between $250,000 and $500,000 during the Super Bowl of 2016? I mean,
2017.
2016.
That's awesome.
I mean, aren't you
Who's speculating that?
I mean, if you have 7 waves and then you're the only game
Any
in
citation?
town. You're the only game in town.
Any
with the Super
citation?
Bowl.
Any citation, or is that pure speculation?
No,
I'm not
That's what my understanding was that if you
And
had
your
seven-
understanding comes from?
Well, I mean, we had discussions.
Does it come from the ether?
We had discussions.
Was
at
it
City
written
Hall.
somewhere?
Well, I mean, you can tell us. I mean, what do you expect?
I'm not-
I have my answers.
Let's have one person at a time.
Yeah.
Josh?
Well, from my understanding was that you already have a set idea about what you'll bring in for the Super Bowl. So,
Honestly, again, accounting is my least favorite thing. I've not the slightest clue. I do know that, like, rodeo,
I'm talking about Super Bowl.
I understand, but
Where you
rodeo's
got unregulated rates.
well, that's not true. So the ordinance that just passed is unregulated rates for everybody except the wave. I have to pay the city for every fare that I charge. So we're doing Texans waves from Bernie's Burger Bus. And we decided because of the time and the traffic and everything, we're going to have to charge $25, $30. I had to submit to the city that rate and pay them $64 to charge that rate. So I can't surge price. I can't randomly price. Everybody knows, and it has to be posted in three places, physically on my bus, what we charge.
You could change that prior to 2016. You get that adjusted, yeah.
Yes, I can't think about 1,600 hours today, much less 2016. So if an accountant wants to come in and tell me that, I don't even know that I have the patience to stick around till the Super Bowl. So, no, I have not speculated.
You're the only jitney service in the fourth largest city in the United States. You've gone from 1, 2 vehicles, now you got 7. I mean, you're obviously...
So there's a reason for that, right? Why has nobody come in and competed against me? A couple people have, and they put themselves out of business in 6 weeks or less. People think, oh, they're making hand over fist cash, right? I wish that was the case. It is absolutely not the case. In order to run a transportation business, a legitimate transportation business that follows the rules, which again, I've learned this week, what's the point? But that has permits and inspection. I mean, my insurance is not cheap, and it was very hard to get livery insurance with zero history. Now, we have 5 years of history, and that's fantastic for us. So that's not in fact the case. And maybe it's because I'm a bad business person and I should be making hand over fist, but I don't know. I know I haven't speculated that, and I have no idea what we're going to make. So, yes.
This, you probably don't need them. Do any of your drivers have that OnStar type service where you can?
We have actually in the vehicles, not because anybody regulated me to have several things, but one, I have 4 cameras on 24/7. And I did that at first for safety, and now it's really for entertainment more than anything. But that was to protect both my passengers and my drivers. We also have a very sophisticated dispatching system out of Canada that has a dispatching system in over 6 million vehicles worldwide. So it gives them turn-by-turn directions, and yeah, it is. Now I can't call some woman and say, help, my tire's flat on the wave. That doesn't in fact happen. And even finding AAA laughed at us when that in fact happened, because they were like, we don't have a jack. And I was like, oh wait, hold on, I've got one in my Lexus. I busted it out and jacked up the bus and did it myself. But so we do have a very sophisticated tracking system that tracks every single rider. I also feel like I can produce very real numbers for anybody that wanted to know. I know how many miles each bus puts on every single year. I know how much that gas for that bus has cost every year. I know how many people have been on it, how many one-ways, how many all-nighters. I know what zip codes they've come from. I know where they're going. I know if they've ridden once. I know if they've ridden 3 times. I know exactly how many riders we had last year that were new heads, not repeat. So that is part of the business side of me. I do run numbers like that. I just don't like accounting them. But yes.
If you made $500,000 during the Super Bowl, I'd be happy.
Me too.
Because I can tell you're working really hard.
That would be, I mean, that would be.
And I'd be really upset if somebody would want you to make $25,000.
Yes, but even $25,000 in a day, oh my God, I would be so happy. In a month.
Lauran, I'm sure it's very frustrating to have somebody offer free services to compete against you, but I think it's kind of ironic that somebody would say that it's anti-competitive to set a minimum price for things. Usually, people that are worried about competition and consumers are worried about setting the highest price, that you can't charge more than that. Of course, now if you can't charge more than this and you can't charge less than this, then you're guilty of collusion because you're charging the same thing. So all this price regulation stuff is really, when a new supermarket opens, they give you free Cokes and free this and free that. Why? Because they have to have something to start their business. So the fact that somebody was using free competition to try to take some of your business is replicated across Houston every day when somebody has a grand opening.
But when you open a restaurant let's take a restaurant for example, right? Lambo-ish opens next door. And they have the exact same menu, same feel, same whatever. It's still a restaurant is a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, whatever, with a buffet. But they say, but everything's free, same quality, whatever. That's anti-competitive. That's trying to put the people out of business. Lyft and Uber are upside down in every single ride that they offer right now. Why? Because they don't care about making money. That's not their goal. But in order to be competitive,
you compete against people that don't care about making money. But that's what the free market's all about. If some people want to
free market does not mean go into business for free. Let's be clear about that. Free market does not mean open a business for free. There's still certain things that you have to do for the public safety. But free, yes, everybody come in, just make sure that there's public safety. And I mean, no one can.
But I understand.
No small business could ever compete against a service that will continually offer free service. So,
just a technique to get customers.
Unfortunately, I don't have that ability.
I've got kind of a weird question here. The thing is, what dawned on me slowly is these apps that were coming in on a free service, an illegal service, and so forth. What they were doing was totally bypassing all the things that usually are involved in how do you break up a criminal activity. And I'm just wondering how many other things are just going to be an app on a phone and then somebody comes along and takes you to the poker game.
Well, okay, so I don't know if all of you are aware, but there is a relatively large lawsuit that was filed in the city of Houston by a very large portion of the vehicle for hire businesses. I am not one of them that's a party in the suit that is in fact suing Uber and Lyft under the RICO Act. And the City of Houston vehicles for hire are not the only ones. There's hundreds of these lawsuits across the world. They're not only being not sued in like 2 continents at this point. And like I said, they're upside down on every ride because the majority of the money is spent on lobbyists, attorneys, and marketing. So my business is not to figure out how to bust up criminals. It's to take cars off the road and give good service. And I don't know. I mean, it is a ethical challenge. But again, and this is my analogy to the city often, say Uber restaurant starts, okay? And they launch hundreds of restaurants all over the place. Steakhouses, 5-star dining, McDonald's-esque, fast food, whatever. And they just pop up all over the place. But they haven't gotten permits or anything, but they had so much money, they did the build-outs, they just opened the doors. They pay the tickets, they don't care, they have so much money, they don't care. I'm pretty sure that the city would put a bolt on every one of those doors, right? But the city has not put a boot on their tires. And the city says to me, we would only do it like if we found out about it. I mean, there are plenty, they told me, there's plenty of restaurants, there's brothels, there's whatever, all over Houston, Lauran, operating illegally. But if we don't know about them, we don't have the ability to do anything about it. I think
we don't have too many stories of so many closing. Lewis.
I don't understand. Didn't you say that you had part-time drivers, doctors?
not doctors.
Doctors, the lawyers,
Uh-huh.
the sword. You own the car, they own the car.
I own the vehicles. They're my employees. I pay 24/7 insurance that covers them, the passenger, and it doesn't matter if there's a person in the coach, if they hit a car on the way to the gas station.
How are you different from any other taxi company?
Well, because I operate on this fixed route, fixed rate circulating shuttle service. So it's kind of a hybrid between a taxi, a limo, a public bus.
Jack and then Neil.
I think a good analogy for what you're describing as far as what Uber is doing would be like Standard Oil. They would go into a new market, they would sell below production, significantly below production cost. When they were able to drive everyone out of business, then they would raise their rates significantly higher. This was the same strategy that, as I recall, Microsoft used, because I still remember getting free operating systems from Microsoft. Everybody, I've seen this before. I know how the movie ends. It ends with an organization having effectively monopolistic power.
I got a question. Where's their money coming from?
Sorry.
A question from Neil.
Okay, I've been taking a bunch of notes here. I understand that you are under a fixed pricing structure. The powers that are at the City of Houston have decreed that if you're taking passenger from point A to point B, you charge that much. What you are saying is Uber and Lyft. Well, I also understand that Yellow Cab is also under a fixed structure.
All taxis.
Yeah, all taxis are.
And we can't charge cancellation, and we can't charge surge, and taxis are required to charge a senior discount.
A senior discount. Okay, so you don't have any price discriminatory behavior ability at all. You just, okay. But Uber and Lyft presumably do.
Right, and they also, so their pricing model, which they will not release to the public, it's proprietary information, isn't on a fixed anything, and they don't really release it, but they say that their surge pricing, and with Lyft it's called happy hours, but they call it something else. Prime time, thank you. That they do that based on demand, but there are drivers who submit to the federal cases from Uber that had emails from Uber saying turn off your apps so that they could surge price. And so they can charge, they don't have to pay the city for anything. They can charge a different price to every one of you at the exact same minute.
Right. One other question, real quick. I remembered, when I was blogging, I covered your story. Now, one of the irritations I personally have with the vehicle for hire ordinance is specifically, you had mentioned that vehicles are not allowed to be older than 5 years old, in order to operate on city streets. I personally find that offensive, but
It's actually not 5 anymore.
how
Each
old-
one is different. Charters don't have an age limit.
Okay.
School buses don't have an age limit. They have to follow Texas regulations.
Okay.
It did pass at City Hall this week that mine, it used to be 5 years when I started, then we changed it to 10 years.
Okay.
And now it's every year beyond 10 years, I have to have like a third-party 17-page inspection. Right, 'cause
inspection, okay.
we don't even put 10,000 miles on a bus in a year.
Okay, okay, well,
And I think taxis are 7 years. Is that, Jason, is that right?
It's the 7th goes to the third-party check.
Right, so 6 years, but then the
so
7th year.
that time limit has been partially lifted, because right there, that should drop prices quite a bit, knock on wood. Anyway, I'll let it go.
Okay, David?
Let me go back to this cutthroat competition argument again. Another historical example from Houston, which didn't turn out the way Jack was speculating. And if you'll remember Braniff and Southwest flying between here and Dallas and San Antonio, Braniff lowered the price to $10 a fare, trying to drive Southwest out of business. Southwest stuck in it, and Braniff went belly up. And now we have the benefit of, maybe Jack would say Southwest's a monopoly now, but nonetheless, it's one of the cheaper airlines
Well,
around.
under the circumstances that you're talking about, if you have two equally sized competitors, then one can't sustain more punishment than the other. On the other hand,
Southwest wasn't an equal sized competitor to Braniff, that's for sure.
Braniff was.
Braniff's on the own to Southwest.
So did
Southwest has
Southwest.
3 planes to go between Austin, Dallas, and Houston.
I actually don't know how large Southwest was back then.
No, it was a very asymmetric
It was.
competition.
I guess what I can say to all that is, fault me for not, when I opened my doors, going to a venture capitalist and selling them my idea, because then I could compete. But it's not like, I personally don't see it as the same. I wish I had Southwest Airlines or whatever airline you just mentioned's money, or a quarter of any of these. My question to you all is, so they're valued at $250 million and $18 billion respectively, Lyft and Uber. They have the money to do what's right, so why is nobody questioning why they're not I don't have the money to do what's right, but I do it because it's what's right. But it would cost them a dime in the bucket to have 24/7 insurance, and they could pay for every vehicle in the entire world's permits and still not have any impact on their bottom line. So, and another one of my faults is probably following the rules. Even the city tells me May 31st I have to get my permits every year, and this was at the peak of all of this. And I said, fine, I won't get permitted. Ticket me if you find me. They're like, you wouldn't do that, Lauran. That's the point. You're right. I wouldn't do that, but the city's telling me to just do it. Fine, do what they're doing. Pay the tickets. And I'll tell you what, when all this started, inspectors started getting on my buses every single night. And they do their little inspection. They ask my drivers for their licenses, and they shake their hands and they get off because they're licensed. We have the insurance. I'm a giant orange bus. You can't really miss me, right? So it's not like I can get away with much, but these are random cars with random people that they have no idea who you are or who you're not, right? So it's not really.
Oh, I believe Lyft and Uber do have some kind of screening process. Suddenly, what you talked about the Lyft screening process for drivers.
Say again?
Screening process for drivers.
Well,
I guess you
took about-
get you on mic.
Pardon?
Once you come out here, we'll get you on mic.
And while he's on his way up, let me say, both of them have an internal screening process, right? I could tell you I have an internal screening process. I do. I don't think it's very good, but I did pay for this service. It's publicdata.com. An attorney told me to use it. But that's just me telling you and you having to trust me as the business owner, as opposed to an entity that does a thorough one.
I'll say this too, I saw the TV report about the city's procedure for screening drivers, taxi drivers, and it turns out they got a waiver process. There's a woman at City Hall that will grant an ex-con a waiver on the normal 5-year rule if you can't be, have been in jail in the last 5 years, if you decide that you're actually a good reformed person. So I'm not so sure that the ordinary system we have actually protects riders from possible criminal driving.
The truth is, you could have a totally clear background and still do something horrible, right? So nothing is going to protect anyone from everything.
We've got 3 minutes. Why don't you give Santos a moment to explain the lift screening process?
On the Lyft company, I had heard about it, and they were impounding vehicles in Austin, and so I didn't want to get my truck impounded, and so I waited, but it took about a month to get approved. They run a criminal background check, the whole deal. A guy called a mentor comes out, takes a picture of your vehicle, inspects it and all that, and then it took another 3 weeks to finally get approved.
So it was a very quick and simple process. Was there any kind of a background check and any criminal behavior?
Yeah, they took a while to,
They did that
check my driver's license. Yeah, because I had to scan it and send it in and all that stuff.
So that if you had a criminal background, that would show up?
Presumably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that.
I also just want to say one other part that has been very challenging, right? I feel like I am a Chihuahua at a Michael Vick pit bull fight here. And everybody at City Hall, even my competitors, right? Taxis, who I talk to every day, limos, Uber, Lyft people, City Council, the mayor, give support verbally about me and how we need more businesses with integrity, like the Wave and yada yada, and I appreciate the support. And they all agree with all of the things that are concerns to me, because it's not about competition, it's just really truly about public safety. But I'm like, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? To these giant pit bulls, and right when all of this ended, every media source swarmed the taxi owners and Lyft and Uber. And I felt like this battle has been in the public's eye about Uber and Lyft and the taxi monopolies, right? But I feel like other small business owners have been an unnecessary consequence to that battle. And while, yes, I hope that it increases everybody and vehicles for hires, our vehicles and our process and our programs that we have, but I feel like there's been a very unfortunate circumstance, and our customers love us, and we do take cars off the road, and our goal is to improve public safety and decrease emissions, and I think that we're doing a very good job of that, and I hope that I have the ability to continue to do that.
Laura, we got about 20 seconds. Any thoughts you want to wrap up with?
Ride the wave. Everybody ride the wave, and we're hiring a ton of drivers. No, we also do a lot of the festivals in town to kind of help with that. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Laura. Great presentation. Highly educational. Of course, it's now being recorded, and I can send you the link to you get the whole story to look at again. I thought we got a very in-depth presentation on the difficulties and the challenges of being in the for-hire transportation business. Thank you again, Lauren. See you next Friday. No, I think we're out of time. We're out of time.
So Uber's largest investor is Google Investments.
Awesome.
And the second would be Goldman Sachs and Fidelity. Their insurance is through James River Insurance. It's just a surplus lines insurance that is owned by Goldman Sachs out of Bermuda. Lyft's, I'm not sure of the venture capitalists. They did just have in May a very large round of venture capital funding. That's about it. It's hard to compete against Google.
Yeah, it seems obvious.